Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic. Historians of Reddit, what is the biggest fuck you moment in history? Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send a very fast working one to Moscow and I certainly won't have to send another. Tito to Joseph Stalin. If someone made a black comedy TV series about the Eastern Bloc, this would be one of the highlights. Have you seen The Death of Stalin? The Battle of Alger. Julius Caesar's attacking some Gauls in modern-day France, and they go hide in a castle on top of a hill. Caesar's army isn't big enough to take them all at once, and the Gauls have reinforcements coming, so a siege is impossible. So Caesar just builds a bigger castle around the one he's attacking. He literally just built 2 walls back to back in a ring around the castle. The first Gaul army was already too small to defeat Caesar, and his fortifications only gave him a greater advantage. The reinforcements were also unable to defeat Caesar's army now that he was behind several layers of spike pits and both earthen and wooden walls. Plus the Gauls inside had no way to communicate with the reinforcements outside, so they couldn't coordinate attacks. Both Gallic armies were defeated as they attacked Caesar's newly built fortifications, and Caesar emerged victorious. It's probably my favorite battle of all time. The Romans had to build over 20 miles of walls, right? And they did it really fast. Crazy fast. I still don't get how you can build such an enormous structure in such a short span of time. I guess he did have a literal army building it, which helps. The construction and use of the werewolf, supposedly the largest trebuchet ever built. When it was disassembled it would fill up 30 wagons. So anyways, King Edward I built this to siege a Scottish castle. But before it was even built the Scottish people tried to surrender. To which Edward responded with a prompt no. In actuality he responded with you do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will. In other words, I built this trebuchet over 40 days and I am most definitely going to use it, and proceeded to use the trebuchet anyways. I went to all the trouble to build this dank trebuchet and now you bet your ass I'ma test it. You could have surrendered when I asked, you could have surrendered a week in. But after 40 days there's no take-backs. 30 wagons to transport it and 40 days to assemble it, and they expected him to just pack it up when they surrendered. Oh hell number. Big Ed gonna chuck some rocks. Not 40 days for each assembly, 40 days for his siege engineers to carve the entire thing from raw trees. That's even more impressive. Of course he wanted to use it. It's the most superior of the superior siege engine. The Second Defenestration of Prague. The Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia sends representatives to the Protestant city of Prague telling them to convert to Catholicism. The representatives get thrown out a window and allegedly landed in a pile of manure. This was the first instance of a bounced check, no. Edit, thanks Reddit, or rather Dgujivam. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man owning his company that built tractors. He talked to Ferrari about the imperfections of his car and how to improve them, and they basically laughed at a young tractor mechanic trying to tell them about sport cars, so he decided to start making luxury sport cars to compete with Ferrari, and thus, the rivalry was born. So I'd say the middle finger of this guy to Ferrari was pretty noticeable. When Ford was about to buy Ferrari and noticed something in the paperwork that said Ford would not own the Ferrari race team. They were upset about this and Enzo basically said Ford was too low to own such a great team. Later on Ford recruits Shelby Carroll and beats Ferrari at Le Mans and has every single time since they've entered a car. It cost Ford about $440 million in today's money to win. They lost the first 2 times, their cars conked out during the race, then started winning from the 3rd time. So when France exiles Napoleon Bonaparte, the first time, they didn't think to change out military personnel. So he basically rolls up to the first French outpost he gets to, says sup and begins reassembling an army. By the time he gets to Paris, he's got enough forces that France is like, well, welcome back. He supposedly said to the first soldiers he encountered, any of you who dare oppose the emperor, fire. The soldiers cheered and joined him. This reminds me of the execution of Michael Northeasty. Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order. It will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France, and not one against her. Soldiers, fire. The soldiers fired and killed him. The French newspapers which, in 1815, were subject to the censor, announced the departure of Bonaparte from Elba, his progress through France, and his entry into Paris in the following ingenious manner. March the 9th, the Anthropophagus has quitted his den. 10th, the Corsican ogre has landed at Cape Juan. 11th, the tiger has arrived at Gap. 12th, the monster slept at Grenoble. 13th, the tyrant has passed through Lias. 14th, the usurper is directing his steps towards Dijon, but the brave and loyal Burgundians have risen en masse and surrounded him on all sides. 18th, Bonaparte is only 60 leagues from the capital, he has been fortunate enough to escape the hands of his pursuers. 19th, Bonaparte is advancing with rapid steps, but he will never enter Paris. 20th, Napoleon will, tomorrow, be under our ramparts. 21st, the Emperor is at Fontainebleau. 22nd, His Imperial and Royal Majesty, yesterday evening, arrived at the Tuileries, amidst the joyful acclamations of his devoted and faithful subjects. That is amazing. I will admit that my French history is just awful, but I was curious, how do the French treat the history of Napoleon? Is it like how the Russians treat Stalin and Lenin, how Americans treat someone like Washington or say Teddy Roosevelt, or is it somewhere in between? https://wikipedia.org/wiki/Olga_of_Kiev. Olga of Kiev. When her husband died, the country that killed him assumed they'd just take over and force her into marriage. She straight up killed the dignitaries that were sent to tell her she had to marry multiple times, in the most intense way possible. She then traveled to where her husband had been killed and basically burnt the place to the ground again, in the most hardcore, amazing way. They made her a freaking saint. Worth the read on Wikipedia. I saw Samuela's video on her. He also mentioned how she dropped lots of seeds so all the pigeons in a village would get in a huge flock. She'd get some flammable string attached to their little legs so when they went home to their nests, they'd catch on fire, and that's how she burned a whole village. Edit. A lot of people asked for the video, so here he talks about Olga of Kiev around 2:33. Clarifying, she requested something like 2 pigeons and a sparrow from each house as an apology/capitulation gift. Once given the birds, she tied burning sulfur to their feet and released them to roost. This is already one of my favorite threads in Reddit history. Vario, Chilean warrior who had both his hands cut off by the conquistadors for raising arms against the Spanish. Instead of letting himself serve as a message of helplessness in the face of the invaders, the crazy bastard strapped swords to his stumps and went on the warpath. So this guy was ancient Chilean Wolverine. This is more petty, but when Taft bragged to his friends via telegram about scaling a mountain on horseback, that it was a few thousand feet, clear weather, all in all not too difficult, his friend replied, "How is horse?" Taft was a chunky boy. Didn't he get stuck in his bathtub? Edit. A myth, apparently, but the man was certainly no stranger to a good meal. More weight. Giles more fucking weight Corey. I remember a cracked article from what must be pre-2014 about the most badass people in history, and the only line I remember is along the lines of Giles Corey was unimpressed, as he already had to deal with the weight of his colossal balls every morning. Corey was so swept up by the trials that he initially believed the accusations against his wife, until he himself was arrested based on the same charge. Facepalm. I didn't think the leopard would eat my face. Says supporter of leopard eating face party. In the 1970s, the small town of Volka, West Virginia asked for state funding to replace a bridge into town. The state legislature refused to grant Volka the funding they needed. Instead, the town appealed to the Soviet Union for aid. After hearing about the request, the state legislature immediately granted over $1 million for the town to build a new bridge. If a small town in WV asking for Soviet funding in the middle of the Cold War isn't a big middle finger to the state government, then I don't know what is. The funny part is that 2 Soviet representatives at the US Embassy actually came over to look at the broken bridge, and seriously considered funding the rebuilding to piss off the Americans. Imagine the propaganda the Soviets could have pushed from that. My personal favorite, the beginning of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in England, 1066. England's been invaded by a Norwegian army led by Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, and Tostig Gardwizo, exiled English earl and estranged brother to the English king. They've already fought one battle, they've captured York. Things are looking good for them. They're chilling, enjoying their success, waiting at Stamford Bridge for the hostages they demanded. It's a hot day. They're not expecting any trouble. But wait, an English army shows up. That's practically impossible. The Battle of Fulford Gate had taken place only 5 days ago, and the Norwegians had completely routed the forces of the Northern Earls. The rest of the English army was known to be in the south, awaiting a Norman invasion. Turns out the English had ridden all the way up north in 4 days. The Norwegians were, understandably, a bit unhappy. They form into a circle. They don't have their armor with them, it's at the ships. It's too hot to be hanging around in mail. They've got helmets and shields and weaponry, and that's it. The English send a rider to negotiate. He tells Tostig that his brother the king is willing to offer him his earldom back and part of the rule of England if he gives up now. Tostig asks what his buddy Harold Hardrada gets for his trouble. 6 feet of English ground, or as much more as he needs, being taller than other men. Tostig says they're done here. The rider rides away. Harold Hardrada asks who that dude was, because if it had been him talking, he'd have just killed the bastard there. Tostig says, "Oh, that's my brother. That's Harold Gardwizo, the king." Harold Gardwizo rode up to an enemy army personally and told the King of Norway, known to be a great warrior and general, that all he'd get from this invasion was a grave. Battle commences. Norwegians lose. Tostig and Harold Hardrada both die. Huge bloody mess. English army is crippled. And then 3 days later the Normans land in the south. Harold is fucked. He still marches his army back, gathers as much force as he can, and engages 3 weeks later. He's killed at Hastings. Normans conquer England. Basically a very personal fuck you moment that snowballed quite intensely. Edit, because a lot of people are asking, yes, this was the battle with the legendary berserker at the bridge. No, it probably didn't actually happen. The story appears hundreds of years later and is very inconsistent. Also, there might not have been an actual bridge there at the time. I love that line. Or as much as he needs, being taller than other men. It's one of those butterfly moments of history where if the timing on things is slightly different or the English face the invaders in the other order, William the Bastard is a footnote of history and we'd all be commenting in a language stuffed full of Norwegian words instead of French ones. You can experience just how slim a chance it was that everything worked out like that if you play Crusader Kings 2. Play as William the Bastard and attempt the invasion, and if the King of Norway doesn't die, you absolutely will be fucked. I recently started a game where I attempted to become William the Conqueror, and I had to restart 3 or 4 times before everything went how it was supposed to, or at least close enough. King Harold didn't die in battle, he died of disease in my game. Close enough. But it just goes to show how slim the chances are.